Hello and welcome to episode number 9 of the Terror Cellar, where the everyday meets the unknown. Today I have 2 thrilling stories for you, and I'm going to get straight on with it. The first one was sent in by Steve Turner, and it is called Beyond the Mirror. Here's how it all went down. This story still gives me chills, and I wasn't one to believe in this stuff before. To set the scene, my life has been pretty straightforward. I work a 9-to-5 job, go out with friends on weekends, and maybe take a trip abroad once a year. I've got a girlfriend, but we live separately. She comes over sometimes and I go to hers. It's all pretty standard. But one thing I'm into is technology. I've turned my flat into a futuristic gadget paradise, packed with devices for everything you could think of. Smart speakers, lighting systems, televisions, every kind of screen, name it, I've got it. But here's the twist. All of this modern tech sits in the middle of an old Edwardian house. It's a strange, out-of-time place, with high ceilings, detailed mouldings, dark wood and a massive old fireplace. And get this, it's right next to a cemetery. The place has a faded charm that some might find beautiful, but it's also unsettling in an old-school horror way. My landlords are this elderly couple who, let's just say, aren't very keen on renovations. So it's all creaky floors and dim lighting. My sleek tech setup looks almost absurdly out of place, like I set up a lab inside a haunted mansion. I'd been living there a few months when things started happening. At first they were subtle. The TV would randomly shut off, or the volume would suddenly blast to max. I brushed it off as glitches, quirks of old wiring, or maybe some issue with the devices syncing badly. But then lights started flickering, and sometimes I'd catch the curtains moving as if someone had just brushed by. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. Then there was the mirror. In my bedroom there's this giant, heavy antique mirror that stands on the floor, leaning against the wall. It's beautiful in an eerie way, with this intricate frame and glass that's a bit cloudy around the edges. It came with the house and looked like it had been there for decades. This was my go-to mirror for checking outfits since it's full length and shows everything. One day, as I was passing by, I noticed smudges on the glass. I figured I'd probably leaned too close at some point and made a mess on it, so I wiped it down. But over the next week, more smudges appeared. Every time I cleaned it, within a day or two, I'd find strange marks again. Like fingerprints, but too many to just be mine. Finally, one morning, I leaned in for a closer look and noticed not just 1 or 2, but a cluster of small, distinct fingerprints, scattered all over the glass like someone had run their hands across it. It was strange enough that I felt an uneasy twist in my stomach, but I still chalked it up to something explainable. But that night, something happened that left me genuinely rattled. I got home from work, went into the kitchen to make dinner, and about 45 minutes in, I heard footsteps above me. Not creaks, but actual footsteps, followed by a loud, solid thud. Now, the house is detached, no adjoining walls, so there was no chance it was a neighbour. Heart racing, I did a walkthrough of the downstairs, and then I headed upstairs. Everything looked the same, except the mirror. It had moved. The massive weighted mirror was now across the room and tilted against the opposite wall, and its surface was covered with a scattering of handprints. Way too many to be mine. I don't know why, but seeing that mirror just sitting there, out of place, was like staring at a riddle I didn't want to solve. It felt like the room was just holding its breath. Trying to stay rational, I called my landlord, thinking maybe he'd come by and moved it for some reason. But he told me that he hadn't been there in weeks. I tried to reason it out, telling myself there had to be an explanation, but for the first time, I felt genuinely uneasy being alone in that house. That night, I decided to shake it off, but I kept glancing at the mirror. I gave it one more polish to erase the handprints, and then I decided to have a shower. My bathroom is one of those old, badly ventilated ones that fill up with steam almost instantly, fogging up everything. As I stepped out and went to the sink to brush my teeth, I glanced up at the bathroom mirror, and there were handprints. Fresh, small, childlike handprints, barely visible in the steam. I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I called my girlfriend and asked if I could crash at hers for a few days. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with me. After 3 nights away, I convinced her to come back with me. Maybe with someone else there, I could figure this out. We got back one evening, and she settled in the living room while I started prepping dinner. I had a bottle of wine sitting on the far side of the kitchen table, nowhere near the edge, when suddenly it toppled and smashed, sending red wine splattering everywhere. My girlfriend rushed in, and we both stared at the mess, unsure how to react. But we tried to laugh it off and clean up. A bit later, she went to the bathroom and she called out, saying there were more handprints on the mirror, adult size this time. I went to see for myself, and sure enough, fresh handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms into the glass. We just stood there, frozen, not sure what to do, and then suddenly there was a loud crash from my bedroom. We both rushed in to find the large antique mirror shattered on the floor, the frame twisted and glass everywhere. That was it. We grabbed our bags and whatever essentials we could think of and practically ran out of the house. As we were hurrying down the driveway, my girlfriend suddenly stopped and looked back. She went pale, gripping my arm, and whispered that she'd just seen a face looking at us from the upstairs window. I moved in with her after that until I could find another place. Whatever was in that house, it didn't want us there, and I wasn't about to wait around to find out why. Thank you to Steve Turner for sending in this great story. There's a few things going on here, isn't there? I mean, okay, a couple of main things, right? Number one, the house is next to a cemetery. Okay? That's a no-brainer, right? And then the second thing is all of the tech, all the gadgets and all the technology in his place. I mean, it's quite known that all of the technology and all of the energy like this can attract spirits and entities, and and maybe it's poltergeist activity in some way. Do you know what I mean? So I think a mixture of, this is just my theory on it, right? But I think there's a mixture here of the energy caused by all the technology has called something from the graveyard into their house. And I don't know, it's not happy, is it? It doesn't sound happy. It's trying to, I don't know, it's called a few, by the sounds of it, it's called a fewing. It's got children in there, children's hands and adult hands. I don't know. Maybe they used to live there. I haven't been given enough information here, but maybe if you look back in the records of who lived in that house, who knows? But I'm sensing it's something, you've attracted something with all of the gadgets and the electricity used in that house. But anyway, thank you very much for sending in that great story. And now for story number 2, Mysterious Mary. Let me tell you about the house I grew up in. It was old, really old, the kind of place that any ghost hunter would go crazy over. It just had this atmosphere, like paranormal activity was just waiting to happen. My parents and I had more than our fair share of strange encounters over the years, but after a while, we just started to ignore them. Nothing ever felt threatening, and my dad, who was the ultimate skeptic, always had some logical explanation ready for anything weird that ever happened. One day, things took a turn. It was a regular afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary. We were all at home when there was a knock at the door. We weren't expecting anyone, so we were curious. My mum answered it, and standing there was this strange old lady. She introduced herself as Mary, said she lived down the road, and asked if she could come and look in the garden. Apparently she had lost her cat and thought it might have wandered into our yard. She didn't seem like a threat or anything, just a bit odd. So my mum let her in, and we watched as she walked through the house to the back garden. There was something about her that just felt a bit off. She was looking around, taking everything in as she passed through the house. She didn't seem particularly focused on finding her cat. She was out there for a few minutes and we left her to it. Our garden had a lot of greenery at the far end, so it was possible her cat was hiding somewhere in there. After a little while, my mum went out to check on her, but the old lady was gone. The side gate was locked and there was no way she could have jumped it. She didn't exactly look nimble enough for that. We were confused to say the least. My mum and I went out front to see if she was walking down the street, but there was no sign of her. We brought it up a few times over the next few hours, but eventually we let it go. The conversation just kind of dried up. Later that evening, after dinner, I went upstairs to my room. As I walked down the hallway, I froze. There she was, the old lady standing in my parents' bedroom. I couldn't believe it. I just stared at her for a moment, then bolted down the stairs to tell my parents. My dad, who was already sceptical about anything remotely paranormal, was furious. He stormed upstairs thinking this was some weird breach of his privacy. He checked every room, but of course found nothing. He was angry, convinced I was making it all up. He yelled at me to go to my room and stop messing around. My dad wasn't the kind of guy to joke around about things like that. He was strict, old-fashioned, you know. So I went to my room, but I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't imagining it. As I sat on my bed, something pulled me towards the window. I looked out and there she was again, slowly walking across the grass, just like before. I watched her as she bent down, like she was petting an invisible cat. It was bizarre. I didn't want to call my dad again and risk making him angrier, so I stayed quiet. I kept watching her until she walked behind a tree and then vanished. She didn't come back. I kept looking, but she was just gone. The next day, while my dad was at work, I told my mum what I'd seen. She tried to reassure me, saying I must have imagined it, that there was no way the old lady could have gotten into the house. But I knew what I saw. Here's where it gets even weirder. After doing a little digging, we found out that this old lady, Mary, had lived in the house years ago. People in the neighbourhood had called her the cat lady because she'd always had a ton of them. It's strange to think that she might have been back, searching for something, or maybe just visiting the place she used to call home. I never saw her again after that, but the whole experience still haunts me. My mum might have let her in that day, thinking she was just a neighbour, but I'm convinced it was something else. Something from the other side. It scared me, and I still get uneasy thinking about it. I just hope I don't ever see her again. Thank you, Paul from Virginia, USA, for that great story. We often brush over this. It's a very reoccurring thing about spirits that return. They return to their former property or former favourite place, maybe. And obviously this story of Mary, the cat lady, it sums it all up, really. She wanted to come back. She wanted to be with all her cats. What puzzles me, though, is sometimes the ghosts don't interact with you or the person telling the story. And, you know, I've said that in previous stories where they sort of just don't acknowledge you. And then sometimes they do. Now, this is where it fascinates me. For example, they had enough energy to be able to ring the doorbell or knock on the door and speak to the living person. That really fascinates me. To be able to say, hello, I'm Mary. I live down the road. How do they do that? You know, this is one of the magical things about it all. But yeah, anyway, we'll get into that another day. But it is the end of episode number 9. And I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in and for the support of the show. Remember, please do me a favour and give this show a review. You know, get your fingers typing on that keyboard to whack a few words down for me and give it a rating. A nice 5-star rating would make my day. And if you could do things like that, it just makes the podcast do a little better. It makes the people who are sitting in their ivory towers at the top, they maybe will notice you a little bit. Okay? So if you do these little things, I'll be very grateful. Like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, tell your mum and your cat. Do you know what I mean? Do you do all that? And I'll be very happy. But I will see you next week for another episode of The Terror Cellar. Don't have nightmares. Bye-bye.